Today I want to talk about my other grandma, Grandma Bickett, and Grandma and Grandpa Bickett lived on a farm uh, in Minor County over by Winford, South Dakota was their address, but really everything they did basically was in Howard, South Dakota, where the kids went to school and stuff. Um, Very, very different from my other grandma. She didn't take no crap from nobody. When Grandma said something, you did it. There wasn't any question about that. But it was different. She treated me exactly like all the other kids. I got yelled at the same as they did, and she always did some things that always made you feel a little special. Like every time I went there, she made the best fried chicken in the world. And every time I went there, she would make fried chicken. She made sure I got a leg, which was my favorite at the time, and mashed potatoes and gravy and corn. Those were my really favorite foods. And she always made sure of that. Every time, and in fact, up until the last time that I ever saw her, um, before she was in the hospital, uh, she made that for me. And it was really a different environment on the farm. I had chores like the other kids, and really was treated even more just like another kid than I even was probably at home, because uh, it had me do things that, maybe my folks were always a little protective of stuff, but and I always remember my Uncle Tom, who is my godfather, and would have me help with the doing the milking things and stuff, carry the buckets back to the cooler to dump them in, and feeding the calves and getting the feed ready for the milk cows before they came in and stuff. And I always remember that the milk cows were so big and gigantic, but honestly pretty gentle overall. And, uh, and one of the things I remember about my grandma was whenever she would make chicken for fried chicken, or whatever, she would go out and they had chickens and she would wring their necks. And I never seen anybody could wring a neck like Grandma could wring a neck. And she just whip, and she'd have the head in one hand and the body would go flying and flopping around, and she'd toss the head to one of the farm dogs that happened to be standing around there waiting. And it was always interesting. They always had uh, different farm dogs, but generally there was a Pete, a Shep, and a Leroy. And those are the ones I always remembered. And sometimes when something would happen to them, and they were workers too, so it was kind of an interesting thing. Um, my actual aunts, it was less cousins around there because we were the oldest ones of the family grouping. But I had my cousin Leona is just a few months older than my brother Mike, and my cousin Cecilia, that we always called Silly, and in fact, I thought her name was Silly for a very long time. She was kind of silly, and I just called her Silly, and I call her Silly to this day. And she was just a couple years older than Leona, and so we did a lot of things together, played together and stuff. And then there was uh, Kathleen and Pat. And Kathleen was the cook of that grouping, and she taught me how to cook, and she really sparked my interest in that. And I remember the first thing that she ever had me help her make was banana cream pie and chocolate cream pie. She was making pies, and that's what we made. And she made the pudding for both from scratch, and I was the one who got to stand there, and stir the pudding, because apparently you have to stir it, keep stirring it and stirring it and stirring it while it cooks up until it gets to a certain consistency. And so that was my job, and it really sparked my interest in cooking and stuff. And it was really kind of and uh, being a farm and stuff, I would every once in a while outside and go outside, be outside, and I'd fall or whatever. And I could often get up by myself, but often it was like during the winter and something, and it was kind of difficult. And I always remember either my grandpa or one of my uncles would just kind of pick me up and away we'd go, and get me back on my feet, and I would just walk and do whatever, and it was like it was no big deal. They really didn't, nothing that they ever did up there made me feel more handicapped, made me feel like anything other than just one of the other kids. And that really is kind of a great feeling when you are handicapped, and so often places where you go and you're not allowed to do things, and they keep you from things because of that. One thing I will always remember from my Uncle Tom was when my grandpa Sternahgen died, and he had had cancer and was kind of, been bad and in a lot of pain for some time. And I happened to be staying up there when he died, and Grandpa came out to the bar and said there was a phone call for me, and I went back to the house and got the phone and took the phone call and found out. And I was sitting out on the back step crying. I was 10 years old at the time, I believe, and I was bawling my eyes out. And Tom came up to me and they knew Grandpa Sternhagen quite well, and knew that he was really one of the nicest people on earth. And I always remember that Tom said, aren't you being kind of selfish? And I was like, what do you mean? And he said, well, your grandpa was in a lot of pain, wasn't he? And I said, yes. He said, well, don't you think he's in a better place? And I realized that he was right. And I carried that thought with me, well, till now. But I also, when my cousin Rita had cancer, and in the end, that same thought came to me. So